Good afternoon. My name is Kris Carter, and I'm here today to read you a story. My friend Ducky is going to join us, and she would like to hear the book entitled Ducky's Big Discovery, which was a children's book that I authored in 2009 for the Drakewell Museum. So we're just going to get started and hope you enjoy it, Ducky. Hope you enjoy it, those of you at home. Hello, my name is Drake, and this is my little sister, Ducky. We live in Titusville, Pennsylvania. Drake, where's Titusville? Let me show you on a map. Here it is. We're located in Crawford County, just north of the Venango County line in the northwestern corner of Pennsylvania. Titusville is best known as the home of the Drakewell. This little town was the birthplace of the modern petroleum or oil industry. The man responsible for drilling this well was Edwin Laurentine Drake. Many people called him Colonel Drake. Colonel Drake and his well were named after you? No, we're not related at all. I'm a duck, and Edwin was a human being. Back in 1859, Titusville was a slow-growing and peaceful community lying along the banks of Oil Creek. Lumber was the main industry in the area with at least 17 sawmills. What's a sawmill, Drake? Sawmills are where logs are processed and cut into boards. Our great-great-grandparents used to tell stories about the busy times of the mid to late 1800s. The lumber industry sometimes made it quite dangerous for ducks and their families. When they were out gathering food, ducks always had to watch out for falling trees. Swimming in the creek was hard at times due to the lumber companies floating the cut trees down the stream to sawmills. When the Drakewell started the modern petroleum industry, we experienced even more challenges. No way! Oil Creek Valley sure was a busy place. What's the big deal about Drakewell? Well, Drake's well was important for many reasons, especially the way it made humans think about energy and natural resources. There are two types of natural resources, renewable and non-renewable. What are resources? Resources are things that we use. Renewable resources like trees, oxygen in the air we breathe, and fresh water that we swim in can be restored or regrown over a relatively short period of time. Renewable energy resources include those generated by wind, like windmills, water, like that stored in dams, and sunlight, or solar. Non-renewable resources can only be used once. They include, for example, oil, gas, coal, and nuclear power. We can't make more of these things. So the oil from the Drakewell was a non-renewable energy resource? Sure, Ducky. In fact, oil is often called a fossil fuel, which means that once it's used up, it's gone for good. Oil was formed from the remains of prehistoric plankton and algae that have settled to a sea or a lake bottom. Over time, this once living matter is buried by sand, silt, and mud. The pressure and rising heat that results from deep burial change it into petroleum or crude oil. Sediments are affected by these changing conditions too and harden into sandstone, siltstone, and shale. Oil is lighter than the source rock in which it's formed, so the liquid begins to travel upward through pore spaces or cracks and eventually becomes trapped in overlying rock called a reservoir or finds its way to the ground as an oil seep. This is a rock. This is what a rock looks like close up, like through a microscope. See the holes? Those are the pores. Sometimes the pore space isn't connected. Sometimes it is. Geologists love when it is. What are you talking about? What does source rock and reservoir rock mean? Source rocks like shale are where petroleum is formed, and reservoir rocks like sandstone are where the oil is stored before it's pumped to the surface. As part of our learning about natural resources and the importance of oil, it's perfect for us to be right here in Titusville. Tell me more, Drake. Long before the great oil drilling rigs appeared here, oil was not produced in the large amounts it is today. It was mainly gathered by hand, from oil seeps along the stream valleys and from creeks and ponds using blankets. No way. Yes. Our great great grandparents always had to look out for those pools of oil on the water because too much oil isn't good for our bodies. It coats our feathers. It makes it harder for us to float. But I can talk about being a duck later on. Right now, let's get back to our little talk about Titusville and the big discovery. Thanks. During the 1800s, crude oil was cooked using a process called distillation to produce a thin, clear liquid fuel called kerosene. Humans used kerosene to light lamps. After a few years, kerosene had replaced the more commonly used whale oil as a cleaner, cheaper lamp lighting fuel. Yeah, but what does kerosene and whale oil have to do with the Drake well? In an effort to start a new business to sell kerosene in large quantities, the Seneca Oil Company sent Colonel Drake to look for oil on some land just south of where we are, near what is known now as Oil Creek State Park. The land was well known at that time for its oil springs. I like parks. Everybody does, huh, Ducky? Drake decided that the best way to find lots of oil was to dig for it. He had problems with this approach, though, and the pits he kept digging, because the pits he dug kept collapsing. Easy for me to say. You mean like at the beach, Drake, when our sand holes fill in? Yep, exactly. Drake finally decided to use the techniques that worked for salt well drillers, who would drill deep holes in the ground for the purpose of pumping out salt water. They would then evaporate the salty water to get solid salt crystals. Drake hired a salt well driller by the name of William A. Smith to help him find oil. Let's just call him Uncle Billy. Drake also bought a steam engine from Erie, Pennsylvania to power his drill. This sounds like a deep subject. Was Uncle Billy handy like our Uncle John? Yes. Uncle Billy was highly recommended by Samuel Keir, a famous human who operated salt wells near Pittsburgh at this same time. Using this know-how and equipment, Drake drilled his well using pipe to keep the hole from collapsing or filling with water. The process was very, very slow because no one had ever done anything like this before. Drake was able to drill about 3 feet or 1 meter a day. How big is a foot, you asked, Ducky? It's 12 inches, just a little longer than the height of this page. You mentioned meter and feet at the same time. What's that all about? Well, a meter is a metric unit of length equal to just over 3 feet. Some people like to use metric instead of the normal English measurement of feet. Just when Drake and his team quit for the day on August 26, 1859, the drilling tools fell down the hole another 6 inches. When Colonel Drake and Uncle Billy returned to the well the next day, they saw oil seeping up through the drill pipe. Drake had struck oil after all. Wow, how much oil came out of the ground? Some people said that the first amount of oil was collected in a bathtub, and most agree that the Drake well was making 8 to 10 barrels per day. How big is a barrel? Well, during the 1850s, an oil barrel was made to hold around 40 gallons. By the 1860s, the size of a standard barrel was 42 gallons. That's also called the imperial barrel size. So how big is a gallon, Drake? Well, a gallon is the size of the big milk jug we buy at the grocery store. 1, 2, 3, 4. Wow, an oil barrel would hold a lot of milk. Titusville became one of the busiest places in the world at that time. People came from all over and started drilling wells just a few feet away from one another. There were oil wells everywhere and lots of humans to look out for. What happened to all the trees? Good question, Ducky. Humans cut down a lot of the trees to build the derricks that were used to drill oil wells. Good thing that trees are a renewable resource. It was really dangerous for ducks to be on the water at that time. The oil was loaded into barrels, put on flat wooden barges, and sent down Oil Creek in the Allegheny River to be sold at markets in the bigger cities. Because Oil Creek's water level was often too low to allow the barges to float, humans created dammed ponds called freshets to get the oil where it needed to go. Here are a couple of modern day barges on the water now. All right, but can you explain how a pond freshet worked? Sure, Ducky. A barge needs to be able to float, and it needs something to tow it, push it, or pull it downstream. That's where the pond freshets came in. Humans built several wooden dams along Oil Creek that would be opened at certain times to create a wave of water able to carry the oil barrel-filled barges downstream, like big, giant surfboards. Boy, I bet Great-Grandpap stayed out of the Oil Creek during a pond freshet. You got that right, although I think I would have enjoyed it. Cowabunga, dude. By 1865, oil was sent over land in pipelines to the railroads. This got the oil to larger cities faster. People say there were more millionaires per square mile than any other place in the United States at that time. If you come to Titusville, you will see some of the amazing homes that were built during the days of the oil boom. The first oil millionaire was Jonathan Watson, who lived in Titusville. He owned the land where the Drake well was drilled. He had been a partner in a lumber business before Drake struck oil. Other oil-related businesses grew quickly in and around Titusville. 8 refineries were built between 1862 and 1868. Drilling tools were needed to supply the oil well business, and so several iron works were built in the area to make the tools. What's a refinery? A refinery is a place that heats crude oil to high temperatures to make different petroleum products like gasoline, diesel, kerosene, motor and fuel oil. Is iron one of those renewable resources? Good question, Ducky. Yes, even though metals cannot be grown or made from scratch, they can be recycled and reused, and so are really a renewable resource. Almost overnight, the village of Titusville grew from just 250 citizens to 10,000 people. In 1866, it became a city. How many ducks were there? I don't know, Ducky. They only counted the humans. In 1871, the first oil exchange in the United States was organized here in Titusville. Over 100 oil brokers, dealers, producers, and refiners met on January 14th of that year and decided that a permanent exchange organization should be created. What's an oil exchange, Drake? An oil exchange is where people come to buy and sell oil, much like what buyers and sellers do today at the famous New York Stock Exchange in New York City. And so the oil industry was finding success in northwestern Pennsylvania as more and more wells were drilled. In 1859, total oil production in the U.S. was about 2,000 barrels. In 1860, production grew by more than 250% to over 500,000 barrels. By 1870, U.S. oil production had increased 1,000 times to more than 5 million barrels. Almost 150 years later to the day, oil still is the #1 source of energy in humans' lives, thanks to Edwin Drake and his drilling discovery in 1859. If you would like to learn more about Edwin Drake and the Drake Well of 1859, come to Titusville and visit the Drake Well Museum. They have lots of interesting things to see and do. You can also visit the museum on the World Wide Web at www.drakewell.com. Thank you for joining me today for this reading of Ducky's Big Discovery. We hope you'll join us again.